Hi guys, just sitting on the sofa with a little tiramisu. And this is a video about tiramisu. This is the sixth tiramisu I made to make this video, so I hope you appreciate it. I really wanted to dial it in and get exactly the very best version for you. So I hope you enjoy. I'm gonna take you through exactly what I did, what I thought worked best, some things to watch out for, all of that. So if you like my very talkative videos, I got another one for you coming. So enjoy the dairy wonderland that is tiramisu. And this keto version is pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. It's not the neatest dessert, but it's very tasty.
Okay, let's make some keto tiramisu. So don't get overwhelmed. I'm going to go through the steps with you. None of them are hard. So first of all, we're going to need to make the custard, which then we beat with a mascarpone. We're going to bake the cake. Then we're going to whip the cream and then mix that custard and mascarpone with whipped cream. And then we're going to mix up some espresso. And then now we've got all of our parts, and then we just have to assemble. Then we chill it, then we enjoy it. So because this has a bunch of different steps, the nice thing is you can do most of them in advance, and you can prepare the whole thing the night before. So you won't need your oven or to do anything but serve it the day of your event, which makes it really nice if you don't want to feel hectic and you want to enjoy the process of making this tiramisu. So let's do it. Let's see what we need to do. I always start by making the custard. Now, you could say traditionally you'd want to make a zabaglione or a sabayon, same thing, different languages, but which I find challenging in the keto world. So I just make a custard, which is very easy to make keto. And also you don't have to buy a wine that you don't already own. So I'm just going to make a basic custard here, which is a little bit of almond milk, a little bit of cream. I add vanilla, though you could also use rum if you're using that in your tiramisu flavors. Some sweetener, some swerve here, but whatever sweetener you like. And then gelatin is optional. It's not required. If you want to use gelatin, all that does is when you mix all the creams together, it'll stabilize it a bit. So if you want to use gelatin, sprinkle that over while it's still cold, and then let it sit for a few minutes. Then start to heat that liquid. When it's starting to get warm, but it's not yet hot, beat in those yolks rapidly with a whisk. You want to get them incorporated quickly. You don't want to end up with bits of cooked eggs. Once those egg yolks are incorporated, you're going to switch over to using a spatula because you want to be able to just constantly scrape the bottom of the pan so that you don't end up with a layer of cooked egg on the bottom. So scraping, cooking, scraping. You want to see this steaming. You don't want to see it burbling. You don't want it to be boiling for sure, and you don't even want it simmering. It's steaming temperature. You want to keep it moving so that, again, you don't get, or you get as minimal amounts of chunky bits in it as it's cooking, and you're just looking for it to thicken up so that it coats the back of the spoon well. It doesn't need to be super duper thick because we're going to be mixing this with the mascarpone, and that's going to, average out because mascarpone is pretty thick. And so, we don't want this to feel like liquid, but it doesn't have to be firm. You'll see the texture we get to at the end. You might note I am not using a double boiler. I prefer this method where I simply use a saucepan and I lift and lower that saucepan to manage the heat. I find that much more controllable and simpler for me. And somehow I always get a steam burn when I try to do a double boiler. So I prefer this method, but if you're comfortable using double boilers, you can also do that for heat management. You can see here we're getting to a place where that cream is thickening up. We're getting more of a custard. We're just a very close at this point. You can see as I sort of scrape the bottom, you can see how thick it is. So we're right on the money here. We're going to move that to a cold burner and let it cool slightly. Once it has cooled for a minute or two, we're simply going to strain it. So I've got a strainer over a bowl here, putting that through. It's a fine mesh strainer. I'm going to shake it up, mix it around, but I'm going to be careful. You don't want to, even if you use a spatula in there, which I don't really recommend, but if you did, don't just shake it. Don't press it. You don't want to press any bits of egg through. You're just trying to get as much of the liquid portion through as you can. But before you throw that strainer in the sink, take a knife or a spoon and scrape the bottom, not the top, but the bottom, because sometimes stuff is stuck to that. Set that aside to chill, and we're going to do the next step. So once that comes to room temperature, move it on into the fridge. We're going to make our cake now. So we're going to take 3 whole eggs and add to those the reserved egg whites we had from the custard, what we didn't need when we used the yolks in the custard. I'm going to sprinkle that with a little bit of cream of tartar and pop that into my stand mixer, turn it on low for a minute until those yolks get fully incorporated and it's a little frothy. Then I'm going to turn it up to moderately high and let it do its thing for about 6, 7, maybe even 8 minutes until it is very light in color. It's at least tripled in volume, and it looks delightful. By the way, if you're doing this with a hand mixer, like a electric mixer by hand instead of a stand mixer, it might take longer than 6 or 7 minutes. So you really look at how this is turning out. It's really thick and creamy and very voluminous. You're looking for that. So then we're ready to add our dry ingredients. So I take that bowl over to my countertop, and I've got measured out my dry ingredients, which are almond flour, the sweetener, which I'm using powdered swerve here. You could also use allulose, some baking powder, and then I'm also adding some caramel macchiato keto chow, which I think makes this cake taste amazing and works in perfectly with the coffee flavors of the tiramisu. Now, if you don't have that flavor, you could use vanilla or any other flavor you think would be simpatico. If you don't have any flavor that you think would work of keto chow or a similar protein powder, then just use 1 tablespoon plus 1 teaspoon coconut flour, with an awareness that you won't get the additional flavor benefit of the flavored keto chow. So I mix those dry ingredients together until they're well incorporated, but you can see it's lumpy. It's a little lumpy. The almond flour has a little moisture. It's just, they're going to be lumpy. So I sift it into my egg material. First, I'm going to add a little splashy splash of vanilla, and then I'm putting part of the dry ingredients into the sifter. Don't dump it all in. It will pop out the top. And I'm just shaking that sifter, shaking, trying to keep it from bouncing out the top as much as I can, until it's all in the bowl. So just doing it in batches. If you need to, you can reach into the dry ingredients and break them up with your fingers, but don't push it through. Again, we're trying to keep the chunky bits inside the colander, not in the mix. But so don't push through, but you can mix up with your fingers. And then you fold the dry into the wet, making sure you get down to the bottom and you check to make sure there isn't a pocket of flour down there. It does like to settle. So once it's fully mixed together, I use a folding motion more than a mixing motion. Then you're going to line your pan with parchment. Now the pan size I recommend for making an 8x8 tiramisu, which is the amount of ingredients we have in this recipe, is I recommend using a jelly roll pan, which is a 10x15. If you do not possess a jelly roll pan, I have information at the end of this video on alternative options. But we're moving forward with the idea that you do own a 10x15 jelly roll pan. So after you've put the cake mix into the pan and you have used the spatula to spread it into an even layer, you might need to pull back on the parchment a bit to make it not roll in or stick. Pop it into the oven, 350. It takes about, I'd say about 12 to 15 minutes. You want it cooked until it gets a nice browning on the surface. While that's in the oven, we're going to make the custard. We're going to mix that mascarpone with the custard. I beat them together. I would recommend that. By the way, you want to use room temperature mascarpone or as close to, because it'll mix better. And then I just beat that together until it is smooth and creamy and well incorporated. I like to spread out the stages of making my tiramisu, so it's very little to do at any one time. So we'll often make this custard mascarpone combination a couple days in advance. So I'm just here moving it into a little storage container, popping a lid on it, putting it in the fridge, so it's ready when I'm assembling my tiramisu, if you will. So yeah. Now I'm going to whip my cream. So literally this is whipping cream. So the trick here, though, I want you to know is, by the way, I sped up this footage. Don't whip your cream this fast. Here's the trick. Cream will get waxy and the wrong texture if you whip it too fast. You want to whip this on medium, not super fast. So I will slow this footage down so that you see the actual speed. So here is the actual speed of what I'm doing. And you'll be like, that seems really slow. And I get it. I'm impatient too. I like to do everything on high heat, fast forward. But we want this to be creamy, silky, luxurious, and not waxy, broken, and yucky. So a medium whipping of the cream. And it's ready when it's got nice soft peaks. It's no longer liquidy. It's not sloshy. Now we're going to fold together the whipped cream and the custard and just plop that in and fold it together. Now, it's pretty basic, but you don't want any streaks. You want to make sure it is well incorporated, well combined, and one consistent color. If after you've mixed in that custard with the cream, you're like, this does look a little thin, I think I screwed up and I under whipped that cream. There's not so many words being used in this statement, but yeah, if it's like, it's a little thin and you're afraid it needs some thickening, you can actually pop it back in the mixer, but it'll change fast. So don't leave it alone. Keep your eye on it. Whip it for maybe like another 30 seconds and you'll find that it'll thicken up nicely. And that may be exactly what you're looking for. But the texture you're going for is shown here. You can see it's not super firm. It's nice and smooth, and it looks like you kind of want to swim in it. All right, so we're ready to prepare the cake. So this, again, is prepared in a jelly roll pan, about 10 by 15, which means we've got a little extra. Feel free to cut off the little brown bits at the edges, but don't cut too much away. We need most of this cake. Once you've done that, we're ready to portion it out. So I recommend doing a little thinking about the size of the pan that you're needing to fit this in. So a jelly roll pan being 10 by 15, give or take a little bit that we've removed, and we're putting it in an 8 by 8 pan, which means that across where it's about 15, 8 plus 8 is 16. So we're putting a little bit of gappage between the pieces of cake. So we should be fine width-wise on getting all the width we need out of the width of the cake. In terms of the height of these pieces, it's 10, right? But that's an 8-inch cake pan. So we've got about 2 extra inches of length. So we can cut that off of one side of these squares. So, but what I usually do is I cut the cake into half in terms of that width, and I just put it in the pan, measure, and trim off what was overlap, and then I just use that as a guide to trim my cake. And these little squares we've got, we're not going to need, but they're great for testing out the soak on the next step. But I always, before I do anything else, just double check that everything fits right in the pan, and I've got 50% left over. So before I either eat or use those little squares, because I may need them for some filler. So I just double check, and you can see very well that half of the slices of cake there filled up the pan nicely with, teeny little gaps, but that's fine and intentional. So now I'm going to make the soak, which is just full strength espresso. I usually end up needing about 4 shots, 4 ounces. I put a little sweetener in it. You can do whatever sweetener you like, and some rum. If you don't do rum, you can do rum extract, or you can skip it altogether. Once I've got that mixed together, I taste it to see, like, does that seem the proper balance? I know it's highly scientific. And then I have that in my cup, and I get out a little flat saucer with a little scoop to it, or a plate that has a little scoop. We don't want it completely flat because we need to pour a little bit of our soak into it. The reason I use such a little pan for this, here you see I'm just going to test it. It's a little square. And you can see I'm getting an idea of how long I want to soak that for. But as I was saying, the reason I'm using a very shallow object here is I don't want to be able to submerge that cake in case I drop it. I am just placing the cake into the soaking layer. So I'm going to redo the ones that I have put in the pan. You don't want to pour the soaking liquid over that cake. I used to do it that way. It doesn't turn out as well. Instead, you're picking up a piece of cake, holding it by its sides, and putting it down in the liquid, not letting go of it. So it gets one side coated in the liquid. This cake is super absorbent. It's gonna absorb to about halfway, and that's what you want. If you dropped it in a deep thing, you just have mush. So again, you're gonna need to refill this saucer fairly frequently, but that's your best bet to be trouble-free. So I'm just putting it in there, getting it soak on there. As the plate becomes more empty, you can be, you might need to pat it a little bit, or just refill it. Stop being so stubborn, Kim. Keep refilling it, keep dipping, and you'll see that you get the perfect amount of coating on that cake. Continue this until you have one full layer of nicely soaked cake. And then I'll show you what that looks like from the bottom so you can see why this is perfection. So here you can see the bottom, that it's coated the cake and it's soaked through most of the way, but there's still some cake showing, and you have 0 liquid in the bottom of that pan. If you over soak the cake, it kind of destroys the tiramisu. You end up with puddles in the bottom. You don't want that. So you don't want to under soak, but you certainly don't want to over soak. So check that before you wreck that. Once you've got that nice layer of soaked cake, we're just putting the cream on top. So there are 2 layers of cake and 2 layers of cream in this dessert. So you're putting about 50% of the cream down, and it should look like a nice thick layer, about as thick as the cake. It's about 50-50. And once you've got a really nice, smooth, even layer of the cream, we're going to hit it with the cocoa. Not so fast. See here, I'm trying to put another cake layer down, and that is the wrong thing to do. Thankfully, I realized we got to do the cocoa. This layer of cocoa, this under layer, by the way, unsweetened cocoa. I do a thick layer because I like it to be a little more chocolatey. You can adjust how much you put in depending on how chocolatey you want it. This little device I'm using, it's a shaker bottle that I got from a cooking store. Like, it's for like topping espressos and things. Very helpful. I'm not very good at shaking things like that. Then we add the cake layer on top of that. And same story, we are soaking but not saturating. So it should, again, about 50% soaked when we pick it up. It'll keep dripping through, but if we only go about halfway, we're not going to end up with sopping cake. So again, arrange all of the cake layers in there until you've got it covered. If you notice any gaps that seem unacceptably large to you, one thing, this pan does get a little bigger as it goes up, right? It's not a completely flat-sided container, which would be better for a tiramisu. I mean, traditionally, you don't use a Pyrex. You use a ceramic that has flat sides, but I don't have one. So I use the Pyrex. And so you can see there are bigger gaps on this layer, and that's where those little 1-inch or 1.5-inch squares that I had left over can come in handy to fill in the gaps in between. So you won't be sad that you have a little leftover cake at the end. You might be sad if you ate it all while you're arranging the tiramisu. Now we're repeating. We're doing the cream layer. This is the top cream layer. And after we make the tiramisu, we have to chill it at least 2 hours, but I really actually recommend overnight. It's better the next day. So if you're chilling it overnight, don't put the last layer of cocoa on. Do that before you serve it. If you're serving it sooner and you're not as worried that it's going to get whacked or knocked or pressed in the fridge, then you can put the cocoa on now. But one thing I would recommend is doming, I always call it tinfoil, aluminum foil over the top in a nice poofed up dome so it's not touching the top of that tiramisu cream layer, or else you're going to get dings and you don't necessarily want to damage the beauty that is. So before you serve it, you're going to sprinkle the last cocoa on it. I go lighter on this top layer for a more artistic look, but you do you. Invariably, I will screw up and put too much in one area. It's fine. It's fine. Then you're going to slice it with a clean knife and using a spatula to scoop out your slices and enjoy. This is a very, very rich dessert, by the way, so go with smaller rather than bigger slices. Your stomach will thank you. Sorry, I'm recording this while it's raining, so hopefully it isn't too loud. So you can see if I only have a 9 by 13 pan, you're kind of like, that's not going to be enough for my 8 by 8 pan. So here's what I do. I cut along the long side of so I'm cutting off from the 9, right? So top to bottom, it was 9. I'm taking off an inch. So now it's closer to 8. And so then I'm moving that to the side. And now you see that I've got more width. And I cut then across into about 10 pieces. So then I've got 12 pieces, right? Because I've got those 2. And then I cut down the middle. And what I end up with is just enough cake to make it work. So I'll show you what that looks like in arranging. So generally speaking, doing it this way, you just have slightly bigger gaps between your cake and just make that be okay. There is a little bit of extra cake that you might have that are little odds and ends, and you can fill in if you get any big gaps there. But this will just cover the bases. You will have no extra, and you'll have slightly bigger gaps than if you used a jelly roll. Now, you do have a third option, which is to use a half sheet pan, which is that 18 by 13 size, if I remember correctly. And that will totally work in terms of the recipe, but you need to make 1.5 times the recipe. So take all the measurements that are in the cake and go 1.5 times. So I'll put that in the notes in case you need that math, but you can make this work in a variety of ways. You can fill in the gap with a little extra. You can be okay with the bigger gaps. I don't want you to stress out about it if you don't have a jelly roll pan. It's a very useful size though. You might want to get one. So enjoy, make it work, have some delicious dessert. Take care.